introduce yourself to the audience.
All right. For context, I am a tactical communications instructor. I work with the Mental Health Commission of Canada. I work in healthcare, with triage. I'm the teacher for the interventions for suicidal ideation, substance abuse, anxiety, depression, PTSD, acute stress reactions. Put a pin on it, I do it. So I'm not going to go through the rest of my resume. That's too much. One thing I will say, though, as part of my intro, is the reason why I've got a Winston up here, and why you see me sweating, is I'm a very experienced presenter. I'm a very experienced trainer. This is one of the few times I'm not completely in control. I am usually the instructor, the presenter. I'm used to wrangling thousands of humans. And this is probably the second time in my life that I'm publicly presenting. And there is the time before that, I did stand-up comedy. And I had a rule. No one I knew could be in the audience because they were my material. So I am a raging introvert. I need to be by myself to power up. I am a person who needs solitude. I need to be alone in order to charge up my battery. So I made sure my battery is juiced. Yeah, I appear to be an extrovert, but I'm not.
So from our conversations, he has a very specific skill set, to say the least. Can you share the training that you do for the people that man the front line?
Everything from compressed self-care. So a lot of people think self-care is, lounging in a bathtub or having a glass of wine. And I go, okay, you're in the middle of an emergency room and you have 120 seconds to relax. Go! So that is not something you can do in a pressure environment without practice. So that's one of the things I give people is I'm in a stressful environment. I believe I've been described by some of my students as creepy. Stone cold with the fingers. Creepy. I'm sorry, sir. Didn't mean to offend you. I'm like, don't worry about it. There's not a lot of people are very calm when somebody is coming at you with a loaded drug-fueled needle rig. It's just not where you should be calm as a Hindu cow. And all that is just practice. A lot of practice in very violent situations. So you can see just actually even recalling that, you're going to see my body start to react. How to suppress that reaction and how to move through it is another thing that I train. In order to avoid PTSD and trauma for repeated acts of violence that I'm typically exposed to or the people that I train is exposed to.
So when we speak about depression and isolation, especially the social isolation that, Matt and I had these conversations of, yeah, wonder what would happen if, and kind of one of those be careful what you wish for scenarios because it actually happened. And we're like, uh-oh. Like our worst nightmare scenario came up and it happened.
Yeah.
And now the world had to literally be forced into isolation, yet you're training people to deal with the people and the after effects of the isolation.
Yeah. The responders and the people that I would train and teach, and I'll teach anyone, I don't care. You don't have to have a uniform, and just general public, I'll teach anyone. The problem with the World Health event that occurred was time. Is if you have a mental health problem, you got to prevent it from turning into a serious problem or even a diagnosis, which then requires higher intervention, medication, treatment, whatever. So it's when it overwhelms your coping mechanisms. And I just started the clock. It was just like, click, right on the stopwatch. I have to check in with all the people within 3 to 6 months. And that's roughly the time frame where people began to crack. And so when you have a person who is a responder trying to triage you, and they're not okay, their bucket isn't full, they're already cracked, they're already empty, how do you teach them the skills they're going to need and the habits? Sometimes you can't teach it, sometimes you got to show them or you got to let them find out the hard way. But the most important thing is giving them the materials so they can build it themselves. And that's one of the big gear shifts I found, because I was teaching into the pandemic, up to and including use of force. So you can imagine me covered in gowns and faced off with a bunch of nurses coming at me or security staff, and they've got to get me on the bed and bolt me down. And how does that work? Where's your emotional tank to be able to deal with that in full garb? So that gives you a little peek into some of the things I do. I'm the final exam. So yeah, it's one of the things that really rocked it for me was I'm trained in this stuff. I can preach it 6 ways to Sunday, and yet even my skills began to crack. You know, you can bang that drum on self-care as much as you like, but push comes to shove, you will eventually fail.
Yeah. So the word that sticks out is coping.
Mm-hmm.
And I coped, as I shared a little bit. Yeah, my coping mechanism was definitely toxic. Yeah, it was a way to numb out, and I didn't understand how to release the pressure. It took me a long time to understand that, but it was to numb out so I couldn't feel.
Very
And
common.
I understand from all the people I've worked with, because of the isolation, the feelings, the depression, people don't know how to deal with it, so they just start numbing out. It has to have an impact. Like when I work with people, it impacts me. So for the people that you train on the front line to deal with the depression, the suicidal tendencies, the manic episodes when the person's in a drug-infused paranoia, like how do they cope?
Identify what the tap does. So I'm going to stretch a metaphor. Actually, the bucket is coming back because that is literally how we describe it in healthcare. And there's 2 kinds of taps coming out the bottom of that bucket. One is genuinely emptying it out into where you want it to go, and the other one feeds back into the top. And so we look at it the other way around. If your bucket's too full, you're too stressed. And once it overflows, life's a mess. So it's what's your break point? And the real delimiters, really the heavy ones, are depression and its best friend, anxiety, and usually 70 to 80% of cases, and suicidal ideation. So you've got to have a look at the precursors that lead up to that in order to manage it. And in healthcare, you'll find that these are unbelievably caring people. They have colossal capacity. They will turn up to work and get punched, sometimes get stabbed. And that person with dementia doesn't mean to hit them. That's a medical condition. They're flailing out. They don't recognize this person. Who is this over my bed? So it's a matter of what does it take to make you tip over? What does it take to overwhelm your coping mechanisms and make the circuit breaker blow and try and save you? In my case, it took assisting a friend of mine dying. That was how far it went. I have unlimited capacity to help people day in, day out, classes of 20 to 30 people. I can talk about violence, drug use, suicidal ideation, as much as you like. I'm very comfortable talking about death. And when a friend of mine approached me, he was an old working partner. He used to work surveillance with me and all that kind of stuff. And he said, "Hey man, I got a problem." I'm like, "What's up?" He's like, "Brain cancer, and it's beginning to press on my spine, and I'm losing feeling. And I need your assistance with, I don't want to go out in the hospital." Now, for reference, you need to be really careful with that discussion, because if you encourage it in any way, that's a lot of prison time. So one of the weird things is he knew that I'd work palliative care. I'm very comfortable with death and talking about it. And so he approached me and said, "Hey man, I'd like some help." And in the end, I looked after almost everything for him. He made me the executive of his estate. He didn't leave anything to me, but my job was to stop any fights. I was the last loving hands to put him in a hearse, and that is something to do in front of a parent and all the loved ones, is to bring a body out of a bedroom, through a living room, and get it down in the elevator to P2. And no one noticed as I came back up in the room. I had grease all in my arms because I had to block the elevator, because we didn't plan on a 6-foot-something guy going in a very small elevator. So we had to stand him up, and there was a whole thing. And I was fine. I had this mom sitting down across me going, "So what's the next step?" And absolutely, here's what it works, and here's what you do. This is as good as it gets. It's always worse than this. So I don't know how this happened, but as long as it's all popping along, these are the next steps, and this is what occurs. And To this day, I have not cried about it. I've not grieved it. I felt the edge of tears once at about 2:30 in the morning. But I'm either that inured or just that comfortable with death, where I'm glad I gave that family such a good experience. But I found out something after the funeral. And that was, I got a very different side of my buddy Garrett. Everyone remembers him as this loving, quiet, astute musician, loves, randomly going downtown and handing out roses and just being adorable and sweet, where you just want to vomit rainbows and puppies and unicorns and stuff. You're like, oh my God, you're so adorable. But what I found out when I was sitting next to his widow, his husband, and we were doing a little video thing because it was pandemic, right? So we couldn't hold a funeral, was I didn't get that side of him. I got the dragged to the gun range, asked lots of questions, bugged at 2 in the morning with a text message. So how do you handle PTSD? Just light questions at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I had to come to terms that I was actually kept in this little bubble. That's where he kept me as preparation. And I found out that he had had cancer for years and years and years. And I only found out halfway through my relationship of knowing him as a friend, when I had to get him off the couch, like one day and a half after chemo, and drag him out to make him move and engage and not be isolated. And I found I've caught his problem, where he isolated because of his illness, and he didn't want to talk about cancer because that was exhausting and no one else had it. And if you're talking to cancer people about cancer, well, it's the only thing you talk about. It's kind of like sports at a bar, you just can't avoid, so which team do you love? What kind of cancer do you have? That's actually how it works. It's weird. And I was the only one where he could relax, and it just wasn't a topic, and I didn't care. And he kept me in his back pocket. And I met his mom 2 weeks before his death. And it was a surreal experience facing this family. And they're like, who are you? And I'm like, I'm the guy that's going to handle everything. Literally, I'm the executive of the estate. I'm going to handle the funeral. I've got all this. I was so good with the funeral. The funeral home called me up 3 days later after I'd interacted with them and said, look, we had this lady who's inquiring about her own funeral for medically assisted death. We have no idea how to handle this. Can you please talk to her? So I did a free consult right there, hour and a half. Like, no problem, put it through. And then they called me again. And then again. And that's when I learned that what I really do for the Mental Health Commission, or with them, I should say, not for, with them, I work with them, and I'm a facilitator with them, is that what I do as a facilitator to train people, and what I take as my baseline and my normal, I'm the mutant in the room. I'm the one with the tentacles. And people are looking at me going, what is that thing? And that was something that was very isolating for me. I thought I was normal. No one told me. And then a funeral director calls you up and goes, I've never met anyone that does what you do. That was amazing. Can you do it again? And I went, well, if you talk to any of my students, I've got people. Do you want a phone number? And that's what made me very passionate of getting out of my previous career in surveillance and a whole bunch of things like teaching the criminal code and all that fussy stuff that sounds amazing until you do it and then you realize how boring it is. And got me into mental health. And that became a thing where I began to really foam at the mouth and go, okay, all these skills that I helped my friend by giving my skills to his family when he knew he was going to be gone, which was sneaky of him, that jerk, is something that I want as ubiquitous and normal, like we consider normal first aid. So why can't I talk about anxiolytic responses or an acute stress reaction? Why can't I talk about suicide? Why can't I correct people when we don't say commit suicide anymore? It's not a crime. How stupid is that? If you try to die by suicide, you've committed a criminal code offense. That's dumb. So it's no longer a crime. We don't say committed suicide, it's just death by suicide. So it's the isolating thing for me was trying to find other people like me that was as passionate about this topic. And then irony hits the universe and the world starts rotating around, oh gosh, we have a mental health crisis. Is there anyone that can help? And here I am a little bit overloaded and burned out, because that's a lot of people, and no matter how many you train, there's still going to be more problems. And then really looking at the people that I've taught, are they burning out? Where are their supports? And who's doing what I did for my friend when you're walking someone through either suicidal ideation, or if somebody dies by suicide, and picking up after it. And that's kind of prepping me up here of how I learned to be a complete hypocrite. I am an advocate of, please don't kill yourself. Stay with me. If you don't think you're worth anything, then that just makes one of us. And yet, if you love someone enough, you'll help them die. How do you reconcile that gear shift? I'll be honest, I did not have that clutch. I didn't. And it's still not quite installed, still not functioning. But I'll keep trying, because that's how it works. Resilience equals perseverance. And it's observing those coping mechanisms and watching a person take their own agency and choose how they want to end their life. And then watching people choose how they want to keep their agency for how they continue their life. And it's a very interesting problem where I've discovered it is lonely. Not solitude, not healthy by yourself, actual lonely in a crowded room. When you are trained to the point where I'm at, you can't not see the person have micro-expressions for anxiety or depression. You can't not hear that tonal shift when they begin to start ideating and planning their own death. And that's actually one of the things I want to give to people. If I was walking down the street and my left arm was bleeding profusely, dripping on the ground, and I'm gripping my arm, you'd stop me, right? You go, Scott, you okay? You're bleeding there. Should I call you an ambulance? So what happens if somebody's walking along and you can see that scar and it's bleeding in their mind, and we don't stop them? And that is one of the things I've observed as a side effect of the world health issue, because I hate the P word, it's driving me mental. And looking at people waking up and being able to observe that and feeling powerless and not knowing how to deal with it. They don't have the skills, they don't have the structure, they don't even know what to do. And that's what really circled me back for being a hypocrite. How can I make other people hypocrites? How much do you love someone to either help them or hinder them? And can you do it for a stranger? And it's hard, very hard. Sometimes watching my students immediately use the skills that I give them. Immediately. They don't wait for the break, they don't even flinch, they just go, that, boomf, tears, out it comes. And that's a humbling experience to go through. I have art in my house where some of my students have just literally done me a whole painting saying thank you for being part of my journey. I was there one day. I don't know a way forward to get people out of that loneliness bucket that I see them in. And I'm seeing it get worse as the world opens back up. We've kept those habits of being isolated, even when we're hanging out with other people. And it's this stilted start where we've kind of forgotten how to be connected, or there's some kind of pain response where we're pulling back. And I see that all the time. And as I'm teaching more and more, as I'm getting right back into it, all the different hospitals around, it's very disempowering to observe the damage to those healthcare workers that are supposed to then come help us. Because they're people too, right? Me included, I shouldn't say them, us. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff just jumbled up in there where I look at my professional career, my personal life, what we call lived experience of how do we deal with pain? How do we handle our own self-care? And I gotta be honest, mine has been absolutely lacking. And even though I'm trained in it, I'm not immune to all of the problems of just being a regular, good old-fashioned person who speaks Australian in sarcasm.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing a lot there, Scott. When you speak of your friend, I reflected to I had this vision. I was driving, and don't ask me why. It was a vision of, like, I'm a brand new dog owner. If it wasn't for my dog, he'd be dead right now. And it's the first thing in my life that I bonded to. So I'm driving along, and all of a sudden the thought of, that day.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, let's let the vision unfold a little bit more. And I'm in the room, and I'm hugging my dog, and have the needle in my hand. And then of course, it didn't occur to me that I should pull over, but I just kept driving. And then the moment happens, and then I almost crashed my car. And I allow the vision to happen. And the pain that I felt, it was, and I processed some trauma. This was next level stuff.
White hot fire. Yeah.
So I got to ask. It's like, when you helped him, it's, to me, when I hear it, it's probably the most loving act one can do.
Which is awkward, considering I'm a hypocrite.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you have your...
The weirdest thing for me was, of the day of, because I won't go into detail, but they don't make it like, they don't turn up with a briefcase with a handcuff on it or anything. It's just a very nice doctor with a Shoppers Drug Mart bag, like a little normal tote, which is full of fentanyl and propofol and whatever they've got. And very nice, they're lovely, great customer service. You pick the exact day and time, I'm not joking, like 4 p.m. on the dot, hi. And I actually wasn't, I did all the prep, wasn't in the room. I wanted like his close partner and his friends there. I stayed outside with his mother and his stepdad. And what I felt, I can't repeat his last words to me, he texted them, but I know he did voice to text, and I know exactly the voice he did it in. It's the C word, ladies, I can't say it. But he said, I love you, yeah. And it's very, right, in Australia it's a compliment, over here. You feel me, thank you. But yeah, I didn't feel any of that. I don't imagine Death that way. Death and I are very good friends. And I'll relate, instead of giving you direct stories, which would be a really triggering thing and possibly a patient violation. I'll tell you the story of my mom's first discussion with me of death and how she's a registered nurse, so I come from that background, I guess. She told me the story of when she would work in psychogeriatric subacute, which is like old people and they're going. And some people would have a giant slew of family, like everything you imagine in the movies, just perfect. And sometimes she was the only woman in the room, just holding their hand as the last pulse goes through their body, just being there for them. Later on in life, I discovered what that was like. And it is, there's no animus to it. Even in fact, the more I care about a person, the less that white hot fire hits me. It's calming for me. And I know that's not normal, and that's okay. I'm very okay with either death happening organically or it being a choice. What I'm not okay with is a person forcing you to do it or you forcing yourself to do it. And you notice that comes down to animus, the concept of will and consequences. So in your example, that would destroy me because that puppy doesn't have that human animus. It doesn't quite necessarily understand. It would be the reason why. Why would you be in that situation? Are you saving future suffering or are you causing it? The one that makes my blood boil if I did have a severe emotional reaction would be money-grubbing family members encouraging their family member to die so they can get that sweet couch and cash. That gives me a very severe liquid rage response. So I'm not going to try not to imagine that. That's going to change my physiology.
You're going to turn green?
Yeah. No. I'm a use of force instructor. Most people don't want to take me on. I don't look it, but I fight leverage. For context, I can teach a 5'1" nurse who's been nursing longer than I've been alive, 40, 50 years, to reliably take me down safely without hurting me. It takes 5 of them, but they win. So you got these guys in a bar fight, they're like, I took on 10 dudes. I'm like, you're a complete pack of crap liar. 4, maybe. 5, you automatically lose. Just for future reference and in case someone's chatting you up. But yeah, so that's that kind of stuff. That's the one where I have that reaction. But I don't really look at it through grief's eyes. I look at it as, and I'll quote my buddy, he's like, like I was asking him a whole bunch of questions, and what do you want done? How does a Section 7 work? And here's how your will and testament works and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, I won't care. I won't be here. You figure it out. I'm like, you bastard. He's like, hey man, like I didn't get it, but I swear to God, he would have gone and gotten me 1 American bill just to pass me the buck. You bastard, covered bastard with bastard filling and bastard sprinkles. But yeah, with friends like these, who needs enemies, right? And it was a really humbling thing, actually, to just kind of capstone that thought of almost everyone in my life having a very similar death discussion with me. That came out in the wash, real hard. Once people see how comfortable you are, they'll talk about death pretty quickly. And then one of the awkward things is you'll have one person, of a power couple, talking about death, and it's news to the person sitting next to them. So that's, when you've got a really nice ex-Benny in front of you, it's a little, how do you handle that? But to kind of circle back there, I don't have that visceral reaction to death. And that's because I understand what death is. It's a very good friend. I'm going to die. I want to make room for people past me. The only question I have is, did I do something worthwhile for someone else before I went? Because I don't care about money. Everyone's got that. I don't give a crap about sports cars and your beach house and your jet ski and oh my God, I don't care. And the reason for that is because when I deal with you, most people, and I don't want to be too specific here, but a lot of parents are like, baby's first steps and baby's first words, and I'm like baby's second suicide attempt and baby's third anxiolytic response. Like I'm that person. I'm turning up to your baby. They may be an adult now, but at some point. And so when I look at firsts, I'm usually there for the bad ones. And death is one of those. That's one of the nice ones. That's a release and an end. As long as it's not forced. You got somebody who's not due for that, well then I have a chat with my friend Death, and I'm like, buddy, not today. I need you to nick off. He's like, sorry, can I have the latte? Yes, you can, go. Scuttles out of the room. And that's my cartoon way of dealing with death. And it's genuinely how I view it. And I know that makes me odd, but for some reason it makes it very comforting for somebody who wants to be able to talk about it without any of that grief, without any religiosity, without any judgment. I just don't care. I just ask the person where they're at.
Thank you for sharing. Scott, Goodbar.
Thank you.